Micah Parsons could be even better in Mike Zimmer's defense. We will explain why on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys. Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 if your bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we are discussing the Cowboys defensive line coming out of the 2023 season and what it looks like going forward. Landon, I want to start with Micah Parsons and this new defense because we've talked a lot about Mike Zimmer, what the defense is going to look like, the changes between Zimmer and Dan Quinn. But we really haven't discussed enough about Micah Parsons' fit in this defense. Do you think Zimmer can take him to the next level?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big question we've got, right? Is exactly how does there's some things about the previous regime's defense that obviously worked very well, and the way that Micah Parsons was deployed in that defense is a huge part of that. So I think where we're excited about seeing some of the other fits in this defense, I think one of the ones we're kind of tentatively nervous about is how does Micah Parsons fit in all this because of how well he was operating inside of Quinn. Does he take a step back under this defense? I tend to think that he doesn't. I mean, I think Zim is also a creative defensive play caller. I think, look, if anyone has kind of shown an ability to get linebackers into pass rush situations, it's Mike Zimmer. I mean, we created a whole defense on attacking the A gaps with linebackers. So I think it certainly isn't outside his capability of kind of scheming up opportunities for Micah Parsons. I think the question becomes is how does that kind of percentage of we spend so much time tracking, his linebacker to defensive line play. How does that percentage kind of change in the Zimmer defense? And does he play as much traditional defensive end at, whatever he weighs, 252 or whatever, which, is kind of normally lighter than what you've traditionally seen at times for Zim. So I tend to think that Parsons is a freak of nature and that, he obviously has shown an ability to play at that position. But there may be a situation where Zim is interested in maybe moving him around even more than he has already.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of different things that you can do with Micah Parsons. As you mentioned, you can line him up in the A gap. You can just let him be the left defensive end and rush the quarterback all day. I actually feel pretty good about the way Zimmer's going to use him because we've seen two interesting prospects in Minnesota the last, I guess it's been a decade now, between Danielle Hunter, who coming out of LSU was just a freak athlete, right? And Mike Zimmer turned him into a all-world edge rusher. And then there was Anthony Barr, who was an edge rusher at UCLA, who he turned into an off-the-ball linebacker. And maybe he didn't end up living up to however high he was drafted, but he ended up becoming a really important piece for that Minnesota defense. Micah Parsons is better than either of those players. So I think no matter where they line him up, he's going to be fine. But part of me does want to see him more just lined up over the A gap and creating havoc, because I think that's when the Cowboys defense was, as a team, the most successful last year.
Well, any opportunity to get Micah Parsons the most direct route to the quarterback, I think is valuable. And clearly, like we said, Zimmer is the kind of grandfather of this mug defense where you line the linebackers up on either A gap and just give that center fits, trying to figure out who's coming, who's going, right? So I do think that, there's going to be lots of opportunity for Micah to do that, which means There's probably going to be opportunity for Micah to play natural off the ball linebacker as well, just the same as he did with Quinn. So I think it's just all about individual deployments and look, Micah Parsons is going to be a focus of this defense. I mean, I think they're going to be trying to find ways to get him to get freed up and on the way to the quarterback. So I'm not concerned about Micah Parsons' production dropping off. If anything, he's going to be a better player than he was this last year as he continues to grow. And I think Zim will, fit him right where he needs to be in order to get after the quarterback.
Yeah, one of the problems I think Dan Quinn had, especially down the stretch, is because Parsons was so effective as a traditional edge rusher. He really didn't want to move him as the year went on, which I understand. But you watch it in the playoff game, it's just too easy to double somebody when you know they're going to be lining up at the same spot over and over. And I know there's this theory of, hey, if you can occupy 2 or sometimes even 3 blocks, that's great for your defense. But you're also letting a team take away your best player, right? And listen, we went through this with Dez on the other side of the ball, right? Like the Cowboys under the Jason Garrett era loved when teams would double Dez because it opened up one-on-one opportunities. But there was too many times where in a big moment, you needed your star player to step up and he was doubled and out of the way. I think in Mike Zimmer's defense, if you can line him up over the A gap, it's a lot harder to double a linebacker with the center snapping the ball. It becomes way more complicated. I just trust that Zim's going to figure out the best way to utilize Micah Parsons and to make him the most impactful for the defense, not just him in the stats, but actually make an impact on this defense.
Yeah, and kind of talking about some of the other starters on this defensive line too. I think, DeMarcus Lawrence is a very natural fit for this defense.
Oh, he's
in
gonna
fact,
love it.
when this defense came down, honestly, he was the first person I thought of. Just what a beautiful fit he is for what Zim wants to do. And I think that you've seen that Osa Odighizuwa is a guy that can penetrate upfield, and I think that translates to kind of almost any scheme. That's not surprising to that he's going to have be a starter and there won't be any issues. I think we'll talk about what that other 4th spot is going to look like and who's going to be there. But I do think that the other 2 starters on this defensive line fit very naturally in Osa and DeMarcus Lawrence. It's really and frankly, like we've just discussed, Micah Parsons does too. It's just that we don't have the answers for where he's going to be playing a lot because they're going to figure that out, and it's going to be in a manner that's going to exploit Parsons' best abilities, and so that's not something that we necessarily need to worry about.
I want to talk about the defensive tackles in just a second, but you're right on Tank. Like DeMarcus Lawrence is a perfect fit in this defense. You look at like the history of Mike Zimmer's defenses, he's always needed that one base end that can stop the run at a really high level, whether it was Greg Ellis back in the early 2000s, right? Or you go to Cincinnati, they had like Carlos Dunlap, was an awesome run defender, or Everson Griffin when he was at the prime of his career. Tank is going to have, assuming he can stay healthy, he's going to have a monster season in Mike Zimmer's defense. And frankly, that's the kind of player that Mike Zimmer loves anyways. I think it's a perfect fit, a perfect marriage. I expect there to be no issues there at all. Defensive tackle is a different spot. I want to talk about Osa and his future on top of, should we be concerned about Mazi Smith's fit in this defense? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. Go bet on the NBA playoffs. You can bet on the playoff game. You can bet on who's going to win the MVP, who's going to be the comeback player of the year, who's going to be the sixth man of the year. So many great awards you can bet on over at FanDuel. Again, just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, Landon, let's talk about Osa Odighizuwa, the Cowboys starting defensive tackle, going into the final year of his contract. What do you think happens here? Do you think the Cowboys try to get an extension done now? Do you think they wait it out to see how Osa fits in Mike Zimmer's defense? Or are they just not really interested in paying a defensive tackle elite money?
I think the real issue is all the other names that are up right now, right? Like Osa kind of came along at a time when the Cowboys are just probably deciding that they may want to pay some tackles. But the problem, I think, is that he's coming up at the time that you're also looking at the money for Dak Prescott, Micah Parsons, and CeeDee Lamb. I mean, maybe your three top, money getters for not just this season, but ultimately once they're on the cap, they're probably your top three money players, right? So it makes fitting Osa, who I think is very, very deserving of a contract, a little bit more difficult. So I wouldn't be shocked if they tried to play it out a little bit more. Maybe what they do is they try to get something done during the season, right? Like if they can get through, Dak and CD kind of in the off season, maybe, once those things kind of fall into place. And frankly, we haven't actually discussed this twist here, but maybe we discussed it on Friday. I can't remember, but the NFL just announced the salary cap for this coming season, and it ended up coming in about, I think we did talk about it on Friday.
Yeah.
It came in at about $11 or $12 million more than what we expected it to. So maybe that, just a little extra room is enough kind of wiggle room for you to be able to afford to sign an Osa contract a little bit earlier than you were expecting. But I do think that, in my opinion, and maybe I'm wrong, they're definitely going to be trying to work Dak and work CD first, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And then, once they can kind of get their the engine signed, then they can start to kind of see how they can fit Osa into place and work on his contract so they can move the money around a little bit. I would imagine that they would want him back, just because he is one of the few defensive tackles that you've drafted and definitely developed, and he's been nothing but getting better every single year. But I also know that the money for defensive tackles has gotten big, these last few years. And, Osa has produced at a level that is deserving of a big contract, I would say. So I don't think it's an easy deal to sign just because of all the other stuff you have to deal with. But I expect the Cowboys to at least try.
I think you're right. I think they're going to wait until we get to the season for a couple of different reasons. Number one, you want to see what he looks like in this defense. And maybe he's a much better fit than you ever imagined. Maybe he's a worse fit than we're anticipating. And maybe you don't want to commit that much money to a defensive tackle if you're iffy on the fit. But I also think one of the things that's going to help, Landon, is there's a lot of quality defensive tackles on the market this year. And that's, I think, going to help set the market a little bit. For example, Chris Jones is probably the best defensive tackle in the league. He's going to set the top of the market. But then you look at somebody like Justin Madubuike from the Ravens, who is a free agent. Exactly. He's going to get paid. Derek Brown, I believe, is going into the final year of his deal this year. He's going to be somebody that gets paid. And I think those three guys will help. Leonard Williams, another one that got traded to the Seahawks. They're going to help help you slot in Osa to make this thing a lot easier. I also don't think you can get a deal done with Osa until you get a deal done with CD, but it's hard to get a deal done with CD Lamb until you figure out what Justin Jefferson is going to make and what Brandon Ayuk is going to make. So it's like T. Higgins got franchise tagged today. Like you're just waiting on a couple dominoes to fall, and then everything will start to fall in place.
Not even your own dominoes. That's the problem, right? And not even dominoes at the same position of what you're talking about, right? So, and you're right. Like I think because the money at wide receiver and quarterback is so important, and then eventually Parsons, like I said, Parsons' deal may not come this year, but it's one of those things where you're going to want to sign that as soon as possible. So they may be already discussing that situation. So I think there's a lot of money that is being thrown around that's going to have. It's not that the Cowboys can't afford it or won't pay it, any of that. It's about being able to arrange the guaranteed money in the years that you want, right? So that you can fit all the pieces together. And sometimes the team, the party that you're working with to sign these contracts, they don't want to play ball. So you kind of have to like work around those situations. And that's why we're talking about this slotting, because ultimately it makes you prioritize the timing of all this. And you cannot put, as much as you may like Osa, you can't put Osa in front of CD and Dak. You just can't.
No.
You have to figure that money out first.
Yes.
So I expect the Cowboys to figure it out, to figure out a way to do it. But I'm not confident. I'm not 100% confident, and it does make me nervous that they could potentially let a defensive tackle go out the door when he's their only, qualified, proven defensive tackle on the roster right now.
He's been their best defensive tackle since Jay Ratliff.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's not at all an exaggeration. I think
wait a minute.
Hatcher was post Ratliff, right?
Yeah, but there was one. There was one season, Jason Hatcher, one Ken Bishop season in there as well. Long-time listeners will know that we like Ken Bishop and Devon Coleman. Let's go to the other defensive tackle. Mazi Smith, man. You've been on social media.
What a week! What a week for Mazi Smith, huh?
Let's talk about the fit in this defense. Are you concerned about Mazi Smith's development and his fit in Mike Zimmer's defense?
No, I'm not concerned about his fit. I think actually this is a much better fit for him, and I think that in a lot of ways this is a great thing for Mazi. Now the question is, he needs to gain some of that weight back that he lost for whatever reason. But I think that it's a good fit for what he wants to do, and I think that Zim will appreciate a player like Mazi, being on this roster. I think if anything, having a big-bodied guy who's athletic, who can move, who can kind of break down blocking concepts in the run game, if he can kind of get his hands right a little bit better. I think that's very valuable in a Zim defense, and especially when we have to figure out a linebacker situation. If you can get Mazi up to a spot where he's actually taking up blockers and being a positive on your defense, I think it also helps mitigate a little bit of your linebacker search, that you're going to have to take in this offseason. So I definitely think Mazi could be a good fit in this scheme. In fact, he probably is a better fit in this scheme than he was in the previous scheme. But I mean, there is a lot about Mazi Smith's offseason that there's a lot of things between here and there that have got to get sorted out with Mazi before we can count on him being, I guess, your pinned in starter at one technique for week one.
And I won't be surprised if the Cowboys continue to do some due diligence on some other one techniques so they're not just solely relying on Mazi Smith. I mean, Jonathan Hankins, I didn't know this. Somebody pointed this out on YouTube. Jonathan Hankins is only 32 years old, not 37. I mentioned on a podcast. It just seems like he's been around forever. But maybe you look into free agency to get somebody that's maybe a little bit more dynamic than Jonathan Hankins. We'll see. It's a huge year for Mazi. This is the offseason where we need to see him make huge strides, right? And there's no combine to worry about. There's no injury you have to worry about. Was it a hamstring or a groin injury he had last year? Don't need to worry about that. You're fully healthy. It's a scheme that should fit you. We better see a big jump for Mazi, because if you don't, then I will be concerned. I think it needs to happen pretty quickly here, Landon.
Defensive tackles is a position that's got to get worked on. I mean, even if Mazi takes a step and plays really great next year, you only have one other defensive tackle besides Mazi that's of a decent standard. Because we're talking about Jonathan Hankins like he signed. We haven't signed Jonathan Hankins.
No,
so that's the thing, is that the Cowboys currently don't have any nose tackles on their roster outside of Mazi. So they really do need, well, I mean, I think, whatever the status is of some of the guys that they signed in the offseason to future deals, but they don't really have any starter quality players at nose tackle. And I think no matter what happens with Mazi, they need to go out and get another body, whether that be through the draft or through free agency.
One thing we haven't discussed a lot this offseason, Landon, is the potential exodus of some of the depth on this defensive line. One of the reasons it's been so good over the last couple of years is because they've basically have had two full starting units, but with Dorrance Armstrong going to be a free agent. I don't see him coming back. Dante Fowler's a free agent. Even someone like Neville Gallimore, who started to play more and more snaps into the 2023 season. The Cowboys are going to be relying on some more young players. Do we expect any of those young players to step it up in 2024? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you would do if you had an extra hour in your day? Would you go for a run? Would you take a nap? I know Lane and I both, we've got young daughters. We would love to take a nap right now. Read a book, show up for a friend. A lot of us spend our lives wishing that we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to find out what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can simply do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for any reason at no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Just visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Every dayers on tomorrow's show, Lane and I are going to continue to break down position by position on this team going into the 2024 offseason. We're going to be discussing linebackers tomorrow, so make sure you tune in for that. But let's wrap up this show by talking about some of the down roster defensive linemen. Is there anybody in this group between Chauncey Golston, Junior Fehoko, Sam Williams that you do think fit Mike Zimmer's defense well?
Sure. I mean, I think all those guys could be decent fits. It's really just about where they're going to put them, right? I think the guy that's the most interesting to me right now is Sam Williams. You know, he's just and it's not even necessarily because of Zimmer or because of anything else. It's just where he is in his career. You know, what he is as a player. He's a guy that I think after coming in on his rookie year and having kind of a breakout season, a season that was exceeded expectations, that he had kind of an up and down season last year. I mean, they used him as a special teamer a lot, and they got some up and down results from that, right? I just think that Sam Williams is a guy that if the Cowboys can find a way to kind of just raise the floor on a little bit, just to find a little bit more consistency in his game, he could be an incredibly valuable rotational piece on that defensive line, especially as a guy that gives severe, relief to DeMarcus Lawrence on that other opposite side as kind of a power edge. He's strong. He's big. I think he fits that, the Zimmer mold of a defensive end very well, really on either side. But I think the thing that doesn't fit Zim's defense more than anything is that he's kind of a knucklehead, and he's kind of messing up on assignments at times and not paying attention to details. And that's something that Zimmer is either going to, work out of him, or he's going to get worked out of town, So I do think that Zim and Sam Williams to me is a matchup, a pairing to watch, because I do think it could go to the either extremes, right? Like he'll wash out completely because Zim will never play him because he just can't figure it out. Or Zim will get on his butt and he'll actually, straighten up a little bit, and maybe he develops into, I don't know, DeMarcus Lawrence 2.0 at some point. So I think to me, Sam is the guy that I'm the most kind of interested to see exactly how that pairs out. As far as where they play, I think Golston, Fehoko are the guys you mentioned, and I think that they are the ones that are going to be the most fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Where does Golston go from here? Does he try to put on a little bit more weight and go ahead and fully commit to being a free technique? Is he going to be your power end? Another power end that they have. Fehoko, the same thing. Is almost the opposite issue, right? So those two guys who are kind of the typical tweeners in the Quinn's defense that you need, like that are on your roster as depth pieces. So it's not like you can get rid of them or move them off. Those contracts combined with their production is just too nice that you're not going to just move off from them. So you're going to have to figure out something to do with those guys And I think that's going to be all part of the process in the offseason.
I think the best way to describe Sam Williams is like high variance. That's the nice way
Yeah.
to describe it,
Yeah.
right?
Very nice.
And spoiler, Mike Zimmer does not really like high variance players. He likes
No, he
guys
does
who
not.
where they know exactly what they're supposed to be doing on every single play. It's weird because
he's bitched high variance players that have had higher, highs than Sam Williams before too. So
yeah.
let's be clear. Like, he'll have no problem putting him on the bench.
But I can see a situation where he becomes the next Everson Griffin, because Everson Griffin had a lot of the same issues early on in his career. He's one of the ones, like, he's one of the biggest X factors. Like, you really need him to develop into that third edge with Dorrance Armstrong leaving. I got to believe that Dante Fowler is going to leave and follow Dan Quinn to Washington. You can't really afford, especially with the Cowboys cap situation, to pay a third edge when you're already paying DeMarcus Lawrence and you've got this Micah Parsons contract coming up. They almost have no choice but to rely on Sam Williams.
Yeah.
And that's a scary spot to be in.
Yeah, listen, I mean, here's the thought. You hope that Sam Williams looks so much like Micah Parsons that Micah just kind of grabs a hold of him and just takes him everywhere he goes, and that they just kind of develop in the offseason together, because like twinsies. I just that's where my head goes, is that Sam needs to really just attack this offseason, really take it seriously, dive deep into the playbook, make sure he understands what his role is. And then just, take the offseason extremely seriously, get better, get stronger, get quicker, and know that, look, here's your chance, buddy. This is your opportunity. The runway has been cleared out for you. There's no Fowler. There's no Armstrong anymore. You're the guy. Like, you're the third guy to come in and be this pass rusher. You have a real opportunity to make a whole lot of money in this next season. You've shown that you belong physically, that you're a physical specimen. Now it's time to pair that with some discipline and take your game to the next level. Prove that you can be a starter, because he's another guy that is he's pretty close to contract time here, not this year, but obviously next year at the end of the season. So I think it's time for him to start making his money, and I think the way to make his money is to kind of take it more seriously, to, pay more attention to the details. It's not that he's not taking it seriously. He just needs to focus on details and be more detail oriented. And I think that he could really, really shine in this defense if he just kind of leans into it a little bit.
Can I make a prediction right now? It is February 26th. I think the Cowboys go out and sign like a 32-year-old veteran edge rusher to just give them some insurance here. And I don't know the name, but maybe it's like Denico Autry, right? Something like that, where it's okay. Hey, this is our floor. If Sam Williams doesn't end up getting it, like, we know that Autry can come in and give us 600 snaps in the season, and he's only going to cost us $2.5 million. I almost think they kind of have to do something like that, Landon. Like, I think they've got to go out and get some veteran edge rusher. So
definitely, I mean, they have to. Look, they need the pass rush. That you can't just hope that Sam Williams takes the next step. You can hope on it, but you shouldn't rely on it, right? So you need a third option in the mix here, and you're not going to be able to get that in the draft. I mean,
especially now, Cowboys aren't drafting one of those guys high anyways. So, all right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow talking linebackers.